Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Southampton, part of the Global Sports Podcast Network. My name is Greg Elliott, and as always, joined by my wonderful co-host, Zach Ingo-Finch. How you doing, Zach?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, mate. Not too bad. We're further away from that awful defeat at Brentford, so can start to look at Saints without crying now.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there. It is Thursday, which would normally mean we're joined by one of our friends from the Global Sports Podcast Network. Unfortunately, there is not currently a daily Swansea podcast as we face them in the Cup this weekend. So instead, we thought we'd take a look back at the FA Cup in years gone past and Saints with it. But I thought I'd start with just a little bit of a ramble, I suppose, about the FA Cup in general and what it means. So I'm sure that our opinions on this differ greatly, Zach, which is where it's going to come interesting. Because for me, the Cup is a magical thing. The one of the joyous parts of the season. Less so, admittedly, in recent years, but I remember as a kid, like we're going to talk about it later the year we got to the final against Arsenal, but that really came at the prime of my really getting into supporting Saints and getting behind it. Like it was going to the games with my dad occasionally, and the cup games were always cheaper, so they were the games you were more likely to go to. And I remember vividly that I was year 5 that year, which is a little bit upsetting in itself. But we had phones, but those phones didn't have internet. And I remember that we had swimming lessons on a Monday afternoon when the cup draw was taking place for the quarterfinals. And so we're all sat on the coach down to the swimming pool, like waiting for a text from our dads to tell us the cup draw. And I was the first one on the bus to get a text from my dad, like, home to Norwich. I was like, yeah! The whole bus went nuts. It's just such an insane memory of joy. But yeah, the cup's great, and even away from Southampton, I've had a couple of great games at Eastleigh. Watching the third round of the F Cup, I specifically remember them drawing a home tie to Bolton in the third round a few years ago and going down to that. And I remember my brother-in-law missing the goal because he decided to start walking back up the stairs to our seat as the ball came in, and you see it on Match of the Day of him walking up the stairs away from the goal. It's beautiful. What about you, Zach?
Was it United that drew Eastleigh last year?
There was potential for it to be Eastleigh versus United, yeah, but
Who
it
was it?
didn't.
Who was it at the end? Eastleigh definitely played somebody who shouldn't have been at Eastleigh Stadium.
No, Eastleigh were in a game, and if they beat them, the winner of them went on to face United. But it
Right.
was like a League One opposition.
I still think that's that. Yeah, no, you're right.
It was
Yeah.
Newport. They were playing Newport, and the winners of that game would go on to play Manchester United. And it went to a replay, and then Newport won 3-1.
So long term listeners will know, like, my history of football is really since about sort of 2013, 2014. And like I have family invested in it, but like one of which is my granddad, who passed away when I was very, very young. So I've managed to inherit some of his stuff because of me getting into football in the sort of last 10 years. One of which is as you can see here, Greg, an FA Cup winners medal or winners mug, sorry, from the when we won the FA Cup in '76, which is nuts. Yeah, apparently this was just like up in the loft somewhere for years, and my aunt found out after sort of being like, "Oh, well, I thought you'd probably want this. It's better than it taking up space in a loft." So it's usually on display behind, but sometimes it doesn't hit in shot. So that's like, so I'm like aware, put it that way. But also, like, did we lose to Grimsby Town the other year?
Yeah, we'll get to that.
And like, and again, like, I remember when you were doing some of the research and you're like, "Oh my god, we played Grimsby Town. I forgot about that." And I'm like, "Yeah, because the story I remember most isn't the fact that we lost. It was the fact that there was a big argument about bringing their inflatable fish into St
Is it
Mary's."
Harry Haddock or something? Their
Yeah,
inflatable fish.
like, yeah, no, you're right. There's there's a level of cup magic, and it's incredible to see that sort of matchups and see the different games, and sometimes the shock sort of wins and defeats, and that's fun about it. Like, I think that because of, I guess, the stuff that we always complain about in football, it's kind of taken away, I guess, the importance of the FA Cup.
It's
Like,
definitely got more watered down
yeah,
to
and I
some
think that
degree.
most of the time it's like, even when managers come out and they're like, "Oh yeah, you got to respect the cup. You got to respect the cup." They're like, "Put out their B team."
Yeah.
Like,
There's
yeah,
lots of things about the cup though, like even when it's big club against big club, because of the way ticket allocation is forced to work, you get a much larger allocation for away fans, and that in itself creates like a bit of a magical feel and a bit more like of a vibe. Oh, it's
more
just good, isn't it?
more coins being thrown.
Well, yeah, there's the negative that comes with it too, but yeah, but like 4,500 people packing into Eastleigh to watch Bolton is just insane,
Yeah, no, you're right.
and
There is stuff like that. That's
like
really cool.
a club like Grimsby, who with the best of respect don't get massive attendances every week, but filling up a full home end, uh, like it's it's crazy. It's the joy of the cup. It brings joy, and you love the underdog cup runs and these teams that get far further than they have any right going. Like it's just yeah. I still a little bit get caught up in the magic, but not until the later rounds when it comes to Saints, and with good reason when we get in a minute to our history with the cup. Um, but yeah, so I guess let's, before I go into the obvious part of the discussion of 1976, I want to mention, from the research I was doing, it went back like a surprisingly long way. I think we were talking about it, and it went back to like the 1800s, which is just nuts to me that I could find like the minute that someone was substituted off the pitch in 1894 is like an insane level of documentation, and I'm fully there for it. It was fantastic. But what I didn't know and learned in this research is that we actually reached the final in back-to-back cup campaigns in 1900 and 1902.
No, no. My brain problem is like, I kind of you kind of think about when TV started, and that's kind of when football started for a lot of people. Like, that's a lie, but like, it's that's like one of the things that, from a documented point of view, it's like the old games being on TV, and you kind of, it's not like when it started, but it's when we had like first, I guess, the evidence of it being shown, and the evidence of like the big attendances and stuff. You kind of forget, no, these teams have been around for years and years and years and years, and there are so many teams with like massive history. I think this is why sort of investors don't understand when like a club gets like wrecked by, poor mismanagement, and then they go under, why the local communities are so upset about it. It's like, well, this is older than probably most of the buildings in this town now. So yeah, that is crazy, and something I did not know.
And just to further dig into the wild trivia from that, both of those finals were played at Crystal Palace in London, which it has a modern day attendance of capacity of 11,000, but the capacity both times was around 45,000 because health and safety didn't exist back then. But actually, the
Yikes.
interesting fact is that the professional club, Crystal Palace Football Club, that we know today, were formed with Crystal Palace as their home ground 3 years later than those finals. So yeah, there you go. They did exist as an amateur club further away, not playing at that ground since like 1861. But yeah, they were formed as a professional football club with Crystal Palace as their home ground in 1905. So yeah, there's your history trivia for the day. Okay, so the next up on the list, we've got a couple of slightly, I guess, more interesting and more recent tirades. But first, a message from our partners at Zencastr. So here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform, and Zencastr came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description and learn more about Zencastr. Okay, mate. So we've got to move on to the obvious one, and I don't think it's going to be as lengthy of a discussion as maybe it could be because neither of us were born. But you alluded to it earlier, 1976, our only cup win, beating, of course, Man United. Bobby Stokes scoring the only goal in that game, and yeah, I can't really ask what your memories of that are because, like I said, neither of us were born. So,
Well, as I said, like I think that my granddad, who, as I said, unfortunately passed away when I was quite young, was far more into to sports and stuff like that. Like across the very used to play a lot of like pub games, but usually card games. But yeah, I think he went, or if I remember rightly, and that's why like my mum loosely knows about Southampton Football Club existing, because if not, she'd do everything in her power to avoid all sports, I think. But yeah, like I'm very aware that it was like a thing in the mind of some of our older supporters because, like, you know, there have been times we did win something that wasn't the Johnson Pate Trophy.
famously, it was the last time that Queen Elizabeth II presented the FA Cup to any team.
Wow,
Another piece of trivia there for you, mate.
yeah, that's when you start to really,
Loving
really
these
feel it.
pieces of history facts that I'm bringing out today. Our run to the final was we beat Aston Villa in the third round, Blackpool in the fourth round, West Brom in the fifth round, Bradford in the quarterfinal, Crystal Palace in the semi-final, and then obviously Man United 1-0 in the final.
I'm very glad all of those clubs still exist, to be honest.
Yeah. Two of those games went to a replay, and I think Bradford was one of them. So that's interesting. Different time, presumably, but when you think of
You
it in a
didn't have
modern
a
context.
game, like you didn't have 3 games a week, so you could actually afford to do replays about it, like literally destroying the players.
Yeah. And then the next time that it was of interest was we reached the semi-finals in 83, the 83-84 season. So that was sort of our next soiree into a good cup run. The rest of the history, it has to be said, is not as exciting. There are lots of fourth round exits, a few third round exits. The furthest
Yeah,
it goes is the quarterfinals. But we reached the semi final in 83-84 and lost to Everton after extra time. Yeah.
tracks.
The next piece that I've written down after that is 2002 2003, which was our final against Arsenal. Which, as I mentioned earlier, I remember vividly. I remember sitting down on the day. My granddad had the biggest TV in the family, and so the entire family congregated around his house to watch the final. In our yellow shirts, we played, and yeah, not lucky enough to get tickets, although not through lack of trying from my dad. It was, but yeah, it was a pretty crazy day. I remember it really well. I remember the cup run, just like we talked in a couple of episodes ago about like the aura around the city as you built up towards the playoffs last year, and it was a really similar vibe with the FA Cup final. Like everyone was just a buzz that we'd got as far as that, and we only had to beat Arsenal to win the cup. But I mean, obviously that was a big ask, especially back in those days, to beat Arsenal pretty much in their prime. To be honest, it was. But we only lost 1-0, so I guess there's something to be said for that. It was. Yeah, do you remember the game at all? Were you even sort of vaguely aware of football
I
back
was
then, or?
not really vaguely. I was aware, if I remember rightly, I remember seeing stuff on like the 6 o'clock news, like the local like Meridian Tonight, I remember seeing a lot of the build up to that and them sort of interviewing residents and bits and pieces. But as I said, it wasn't. I actually had a friend whose dad always used to have all of the games on the radio, and that was like a lot of my exposure through the 2000s. Whenever I'd go over, he would always have it on the radio. Would never have it on the TV, but yeah, I was kind of aware of it happening. But again, like it's difficult, especially like now you can get a lot of extra exposure through social media. You're looking at a time where like if my parents didn't turn on the TV, like it didn't exist kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there wasn't like it wasn't like, you know, my dad did used to read the paper, but it was like at the back. So never really read the sports section. Yeah, it's very no one really in my family cared, so it's very difficult to know. And I used to play football like and out the front. Let's put it that way. That's what we used to call it because it was just the front, like our neighbourhood, and everyone else around where we lived didn't support Saints, so it was just a sort of like a non-entity. But as I said, I was aware of it from Meridian tonight, so that's about the extent of my memories, mate. If I'm totally honest.
Yeah, well, Perez scored the goal, and I mean to put into context the difference and gap in quality. This was really sort of around prime Arsenal. Their front three were Perez, Bergkamp, and Henry. And with the greatest of respect, our front two was Brett Ormerod and James Beattie. Both absolute club legends, but very rarely would they be uttered in the same breath as Thierry Henry and Robert Perez, if we're being wholeheartedly honest.
What the strikers of the team against the opposition during this FA Cup will probably be like the pub trivia question that will be asked, right? Like
Yeah,
that's the
that's
only
it.
time it is ever going to be uttered.
We had a very young Wayne Bridge playing for us at left back before he went on to Chelsea. And yeah, God, what a team! Looking back at the team that we played, just fills me with nostalgia. And I'm looking at 11 players apart from James Beattie that you probably never heard of. Got uh, Michael and Anders, both Svenssons, not related. Matt Oakley, Chris Baird.
I did, and I'll tell you, this was the only part of football that I was really involved in at this time, and I could probably pull it out somewhere. But it was, if anyone remembers, sort of around my age group, like early 30s, like shootout cards were like a big thing, and it was because like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh had kind of escalated at that point, and obviously all the kids around like the estate that I lived in all used to then started collecting shootout cards. So everybody started collecting shootout cards. And that's why like occasionally I like remember a bunch of names and I'm like, I don't understand why. And then I look back, I'm like, oh right, yeah, these ridiculous cards. I might have been like a year or so later, but I remember some of these players simply because I had the shootout cards of them.
Perfect. That's exactly what it's all about, though. My kids now collect those cards, and it's exactly the same. So our run to the final was Spurs, who we beat 4-0 in the third round. Millwall, who took us to extra time in the fourth round. Norwich, Wolves, and Watford, and then Arsenal in the final, which is a bit of a fascinating one.
It's a nice cup run, I think.
Yeah, it's great. I just have like really full memory of the full page spread they had in the Echo, and it was like a cartoon of a saint with a club walking his way up the path with like a dead canary and a wolf and a hornet
I
all
think I
behind him
remember
on the
that.
path. Yeah,
Man. Okay,
and a
maybe I did.
lion. Yeah.
Maybe I was more aware of it at the time than I thought. Put it that way. That's mad.
Yeah. All right. So I've got some more recent cup history left after a message from our partners at Global Sports Podcast Network.
The Global Sports Podcast Network is changing the face of football podcasting with dedicated daily content for every Premier League team, women's football, fantasy football, and a daily Premier League wrap up broadcasted in 5 different languages. This is your one stop shop for your daily football fix. Find GSPN wherever you find your usual podcasts.
Okay. So just carrying on with some years with notable mentions. an unfortunate loss to Pompey in the 5th round in the 09-10 season, which is always not something you want to see, but was thought was worth of note bringing up just to upset everyone.
Thanks for that, mate.
And then we reached the semi-final in the 17-18 season where we got knocked out by Chelsea. I don't remember that. That was right around like our peak as well, right? Because the year before would have been when we finished.
Yeah. Why can I not remember this? I have absolutely no recollection of this.
Yeah, we played Watford in the 4th round.
See, I think I remember that. I might have went to that one.
We played West Brom in the 5th round. Our 3rd round game was away to Fulham. I think it was just like a bit of a nothing. Like we beat teams that we should be beating, and then we beat Wigan in the 6th round, and then got knocked out by Chelsea in the semi-final.
Yeah, man, Giroud and Moreta scored.
Yeah,
I just have. Wait, hang on. That was at Wembley.
yeah. No recollection whatsoever. It's crazy.
Okay, that's nuts. The only thing I'll put it down to is I got married that year, so I was definitely stressed out. Actually, I can tell you what it was. There was a work thing, and do you remember the thing that at work, Greg, that I had to go to an awards ceremony for? It was very, very
Yes.
stressful. That was slap bang right in the middle of that project. So the entirety of the first half of 2018 is like a blur to me. But the fact we went to Wembley and I just have no recollection of that is crazy.
Yeah.
But by the sounds of it, it's a good thing we didn't go because there wasn't even a consolation goal.
Yeah, what I do remember is we also reached the semi-final in peak COVID times. We lost 1-0 to Leicester at Wembley, and the attendance was 4,000. So
Right, yeah, that checks out. There's a lot of COVID football that's just a complete blur.
yeah,
And
but I
the weird.
do remember that it was a really strange season. But yeah, we had a cup run of again, not the mostly just beating teams that you would expect us to beat. So we beat Shrewsbury in the 3rd round, and then we beat. We did beat Arsenal in the 4th round, which was a bit of a shock. Then Wolves, and then Bournemouth before we got beat by Leicester. But again, it was such a weird footballing time. I remember watching it on the TV, but it was
COVID football, which arguably, if we hadn't have had COVID, and that was probably the thing that spurred you to start getting a season ticket, which is the thing that got you super into football like you are now, we wouldn't have this podcast.
crazy.
That's just a weird 6 degrees of separation for you there, like the snowball effect. But I still remember the whole and now play with crowd noise to make you feel better about all the empty seats. Whereas I much preferred to hear all of the managers swearing at the players. That was so much more enjoyable.
But then off the back of that, the year after, we went on what was felt in the fan base as an expected cup run, right? This was now at the point where, we expect to do well in the cup. We're a good cup team. And we did make the quarterfinals. And there was genuine belief, certainly from me, I mean, surprising no one really, that we should have beat Man City in the quarterfinals that year in the 21-22 season. So we beat Swansea in the 3rd round that year, and Coventry both after extra time, by the way. West Ham in the 5th round, and then went out to Man City 4-1 in the quarter final, which was I genuinely felt that day that we were going to win.
Yeah, it's all right. We stopped them winning the treble another year later, or a year or so later, so it doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah, and then after that, it's been we've got to the 5th round consistently the last 2 years. As you mentioned at the start of the episode, we lost to Grimsby after we banned their inflatable fish. That was in what can only be described the heart of the most miserable season up until this season, right? That was.
Yeah, to be fair, I'm pretty sure we did end up allowing them to have the fish in the end. because they realise that it's ridiculous. Like they're
No,
not
I
going to
think we
randomly.
stuck with the
Did
ban.
we?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we fully stuck with the ban.
Because I thought that like it was agreed that it would be absolutely ridiculous and they wouldn't be able to like attack us with the fish, or did it just not?
No, I think they just stuck to their guns.
That's insane. Okay, well then yeah, I do remember. I remember that wrong. I guess I just thought common sense would prevail, but hey, what do I know? Apparently, you can attack people with inflatable fish now. It's just, fine, sure, whatever.
And then last year, a fifth round exit to Liverpool.
That's a little bit more respectable.
Yeah, I mean, at that point,
I remember that. I remember that game. That was when they played their entire teenage squad, and Russell Martin was like, "Well, maybe we'll do all right." It should have been a warning sign for the Premier League, really, shouldn't it?
yeah, it definitely should have. Yeah, that was
Mm.
again in the fifth round, but I think we'd sort of cruised to the fifth round, if I recall. I can't remember exactly who we played. I'm just going to have a look now, but it was again teams that we would be expecting to beat. I think, yeah, we beat Walsall 4-0 in the third round, and then in the fourth round we were away to Watford, which we drew and took to a replay, and then beat Watford at St Mary's, which I do remember.
Still mad at Watford for that one time. Did they score like a handball? I think that's why I'm still mad at Watford. I don't quite rightly remember, but I know I'm still mad at Watford for some reason.
And that brings us to this year, where Swansea in the third round, realistically, feels like a challenge at this
The
point.
Russell Martin derby that is no longer the Russell Martin derby and is in fact probably going to be one of our most difficult games because, my lord, if those players do not show a response to whatever that performance was at the weekend, I don't know where we go after that. Do you just fire the players? Can you fire the team?
Like the only hope I can hold on to is that in the championship last year at St Mary's, we beat them 5-0. So you would hope that that's the level we're still at least.
Yeah,
If not,
especially considering Pompey beat them 4-0, right? Like
yeah,
if we need to at least score 5. And also just getting our players to score would be nice, but you got to wonder what the confidence is going to be like. Like I can watch us have 95% of the possession and still and like 100 touches in the box and still not manage to get it in the goal.
yeah. And one
That's
of the questions we're going to ask and try and answer tomorrow in our preview is whether we see our strongest 11 or not. But I actually think the real answer is that Juric doesn't know what our strongest 11 is yet.
do we
So
do
that'll
we
be
have a strongest 11? Genuine question at this point, or is it a roll of the dice each day whether the players actually have the confidence to play the game? Because that's where I'm at. Like they're all sad, miserable, absolutely hate being here at the moment. Don't really want to fight, except the few that do, and sometimes the few that do aren't that great. I'm just going to let everyone else fill in the blanks as to who I mean. But yeah, it's like it'll be interesting to see who actually gets game time and who doesn't.
yeah. Well, we will be back to think about that in much further detail tomorrow with our match preview episode. So until then, thank you very much for joining us. Give us a follow on all the social medias. We're everywhere. We're on X and a Blue Sky and TikTok and all of those things that I'm definitely familiar with. YouTube is the one we always forget. Give us a
Instagram's
like,
the one
give
you
us a
missed though.
comment. What's your favourite FA Cup memory? Let us know, and we will look forward to hearing from you guys. As always, Zach, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for putting together a fantastic research episode, mate. Usually it's me having to bring the history facts, so it's been an interesting one for sure.
That's it. And where else are you going to know that we played at Crystal Palace before Crystal Palace? So thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.